Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Town Hall. Tonight, we have another one of our teach-ins, which is a program where we do programs around adult education. The first of those was on the coup in Mali, and today we do a teach-in about a woman who would have loved to be at this teach-in. So thank you so much for joining us. We are here to speak with Thabiti Lewis and Eugene Redmond about Thabiti's newest work, which we will be talking about for the entirety of this program. Just a few bios before we get to our important guests. Eugene Redmond, we're so honored to have such a celebrated poet with us, is Professor Emeritus of English at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. He was named Poet Laureate of East St. Louis, Illinois in 1976, the year Doubleday released his critical history, Drum Voices, The Mission of African American Poetry. Earlier, as a teacher, counselor, and poet in residence at Southern Illinois University's Experiment in Higher Education, he taught with the great Catherine Dunham and Henry Dumas. He is the literary executor of Henry Dumas' estate, and with assistance from Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, and Amiri Baraka, Redmond edited several posthumously published volumes of Dumas' writings. These include Ark of Bones and Knees of a Natural Man. Also, Redmond is the winner of 2 American Book Awards. Prior to his work at Southern Illinois University, Redmond was professor of English and poet in residence at California State University, Sacramento from 1970 to 1985, when he won a National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship, a Pushcart Prize, and an SCUS Outstanding Faculty Award. In 1986, East St. Louisan created the Eugene B. Redmond Writers Club in his honor. Redmond's most recent release, among more than 25 collections of diverse writings, is Arkansas Memoirs, Poetry, Prose, and Folklore. And today, we will be speaking, we all came to hear Thabiti Lewis speak about his newest book, Black People Are My Business, Toni Cade Bambara's Practices of Liberation. Thabiti Lewis is a professor of English and is also the interim associate vice chancellor for academic affairs at Washington State University, Vancouver. He is the author of Ballers of the New School, Race and Sports in America, the editor of Conversations with Toni Cade Bambara, gotta show out, a collection of Bambara's important interviews, and he's also the author of the book we will discuss today, Black People Are My Business, Toni Cade Bambara's Practices of Liberation. Thabiti Lewis is also the co-director and co-producer with Pavitra Narayan of the documentary film BAM, Chicago's Black Arts Movement. As a literary critic, Thabiti Lewis engages critical race theory, feminism, and the Black arts movement, and the vast and rich opportunities the Black arts moment produced that remain underexplored. For the past decade, Lewis has been focused on re-examining the Black arts movement as well as using sports culture to help people better understand, better become aware of, and eliminate racism in our society. Thank you both, Professor Lewis and Professor Redmond, for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take over.
And hello, Dr. Thabiti.
How are you doing today, Professor Redmond? It's a pleasure to have you join me for this conversation about this work in Toni Cade Bambara.
Thank you. Thank you. Just thinking about Toni Cade, who was known variously as Toni, and then Toni Cade. For example, her very important book from 1970, The Black Woman, had only Toni Cade. And she has a story about how she adopted, took on the name Bambara. So some of us still say Toni Cade. Most people now say Toni Cade Bambara. and there's a certain ring, ambiance, and meaning to the acronym TCB. So when you saw Toni, it depended on, you know, the rhythm and the tone you used to say either Toni, 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 or TCB. TCB, baby, that's TCB. So, yeah, and I knew her in all those ways, and I think of her often, fondly, and of course, uh, out of loneliness. And we had a sister brother, heavy water relationship, and we talked on hours sometimes through the night with whoever else would be there. You know, whether it was Ellis Hazlip, who had the well-known and much-watched TV show in the 60s and 70s called Soul. And almost anybody who had anything going around the idea of blackness, black consciousness, the movement, the black art, theater, music, Simone was at some point on Ellis Hazlitt's show, Soul, his TV show, Soul. In fact, it was Toni who introduced me to Ellis Hazlitt and many of the people moving around in New York in the late 60s into the 70s. And it was Quincy Troop who introduced me to Toni. And Toni, along with a number of other very important Black women writers, including Toni Morrison, including Barbara Masakela, the sister of Hugh Masakela. A whole platoon or brigade, to use a word that a lot of people brought back from Cuba when they went there to cut cane, taught at Douglas College on the campus of Rutgers University in New Jersey. And many of those women appear in The Black Woman, which Toni edited. One of the most important books to come out of, well, the Black Arts Movement, one of the most important books ever to be published.
Eugene, can that's a wonderful segue into just, you mentioned the black woman, into, you know, when someone looks at this work, you know, Black People Are My Business, Toni Cade Bambara's Practices of Liberation, and say, well, you know, how does this Black scholar, why is he coming to, you know, the work of Toni Cade Bambara? And, you know, for me, growing up in St. Louis, my family has an activist spirit, and I remember as a kid spending time on, Eugene will know what I'm talking about, Hippie Hill. My parents would take me to Hippie Hill in Forest Park, where members of the Bag and other, you know,
that's in Forest Park.
That's right, in Forest Park in St. Louis, which is the city. That's St. Louis's Central Park, if you will, bigger than Central Park.
Yeah.
You know, family members who were involved in, you know, breakfast programs, my aunt and uncles, and from there, you know, really going to college and being completely, and my mother having a copy of The Black Woman in our house and, you know, sort of flipping through it. I think Eugene says Toni Cade, you know, at that time. And going to college and studying literature and really being transfixed by my professor, Tiffany Patterson, who I think is at Vanderbilt now, who really changed my life. And really, she was teaching a wonderful course on Black women writers. And of all of these writers we were reading, Toni stood out then as she still does now. And I saw her really jumping, her words and the characters jumping off the page, from Gorilla My Love and the Seabirds, and of course the Salt Eaters, which stumped me. And really, but she was really, I found her really fascinating because I think she was really ahead of her time as far as her ability to really kind of take on and see and navigate, even from The Black Woman. Number one, making sure that she provided this multitude of voices to be heard in the Black community, a multitude of female voices, but also, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, the funny, the good men, the bad men, the creating space for women within the community to have voice, out placing the men in the margins and not and allowing the women to be in the margins. And so, you know, for me, how do I come to this work is really, you know, why I wrote this book. I spent time after college for a couple of years working in Chicago at Third World Press, where the positive education, we had the schools, the African American book centers, the press, all within that particular tradition. And then spending time working with Haki and his wife Safisha, and being able to see all of the various arts activist organizations that were in full bloom still in the early 90s, and being able to interact with writers from the National Black Writers Conference that had been, you know, picked up at Chicago State. I mean, it didn't start there, but it picked up at Chicago State. And so, you know, all those things are part of that, the DNA of the work I'm doing and as a scholar, because this is my background. And so, you know, this book is really trying to capture the essence of Bambara's spirit, her pioneering voice for what I think is contemporary feminist struggle and the history of Black struggle for freedom. I'm really looking at how fiction extends the Black arts movement ideals and really negotiated nationalism and feminism in women's fiction in the 1970s and 80s. You know, I like the way Bambara really privileges ancestors, and they are for her, they are paramount. They have really paramount status in her fiction, and so she recaptures the Black aesthetic thrust for what was the sort of for a new spiritual quality that is very deep in the African past. And then, of course, I keep talking about her liberation impulse that really privileges the process and practices that repair and sustain a shared sense of community. And so spiritual wholeness, that the wholeness, you know, family, how do we get, you know, the focus on the importance of family and the covenant with our ancestors and our family, faith in the, you know, in our struggle, in our culture, in the community, feeling, right? That goes back to these sort of spiritual dynamics, and and freedom, you know. What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to be whole? Do you want to be well, right? As she says in the Salt Eaters. And so I think perhaps better than any of her contemporaries, I see Bambara's liberation impulse as really privileging the process and practice of the work of the people educating themselves to cultivate the critical consciousness that she models in story after story, right? And her life as well, right? So everything that she did was about being holistic. It was about hearing all the voices of the people, whether it was documentary Move, you see that, you know, it's the people tell that story of the bomb in Philadelphia. If it's the organizer's wife, one of her, short stories. It is the people speaking, the salt eaters. You're hearing from the community, and it's complex, and it's and that's what life is. And so I just want to just read a little short excerpt from the book that I think encapsulates what I'm talking about, and then we can pick back up some of the threads of the conversation, Eugene, around Bambara and her work. So I want to read just a quick section that I think to give the readers a good sense of what she's doing, and I think is also really appropriate for this current moment that we're in, that requires a certain consciousness and what does it mean to be activists, etc. And then, as we talk, I'll talk a little bit about, as we're going through this conversation, get some examples in some of the fiction,
Sure.
bears itself out.
Good.
Bambara's Afrocentric and feminist fiction embraces a holistic spiritual essence that culls dissimilar elements of Black culture and moves women from the margins of discourse to a central position. Bambara's feminist and Black nationalist fiction stresses male-female collaboration as comrades for change. Put simply, Bambara settles on a spirituality of wholeness that is first and foremost focused on representations of African American culture, crucial for liberation. Unfortunately, not enough critics have examined the full value of her progressive negotiation of the competing strains of feminism and Black nationalism to heal divergence and the binaries that raged during and after the Civil Rights Movement. More attention needs to be paid to how her fiction defies patriarchal, cultural, and even feminist hierarchies in favor of an equalitarian notion of gender that is global in perspective and is a sharp model for social reflection. So in this expansive view of practices of liberation in fiction of Bambara produced, I hope to have revealed an author who embraces an Afrocentric and feminist-leaning agenda that deconstructs limited Afrocentric or rigid feminist views in favor of truth, right? That's the moment we're at. I hope to have given nuanced insights into a writer who was revolutionary beyond her time, and beyond time as we know and understand it. One constant tangible in Bambara's work was an extraordinary ability to convey the full reality that represents the Black community. Few writers have done a more effective job of pushing back against rigid depictions of Black art, community, Black nationalism, or womanhood to honestly explore inner and outer identity. What she achieves are fluid narratives that are always about the business of Black people searching for and grappling with the tensions, the power that is latent, still colonized in the frozen and untapped in some 27 million Black people, because, as Bambara says, we have been so long on the defensive and are invested in a great deal of time and energy posturing and trying to prove that indeed we are as clean as they are. To be sure, her art successfully models the consistent message that the healthy spirit of the whole of the people is essential to generating the power necessary for effective and sustained social change. There is no singular savior. No one person can be part of the solution unless they first get basic with themselves and liberate the inner self. I concur with Bambara when she said, and I quote, "No Black woman or child or elders or men of any other sector of the community has any monopoly on that kind of wisdom," how they deal with the complexity of the Black experience. A grasp on that new way to prepare for the future. Bambara, adverse to hierarchies, functioned as a sort of conjurer, author, or medium who created stories alongside the people, occupying the same space while at the same time creating space for the people to speak for themselves. So she's always with the people. And she was really, for me, complex because she's trying to not be this sort of what they call this panoptic author that's kind of guiding the story. But although she's doing it, she's trying to just be a medium to move and kind of be a conduit to which the people speak through. So the title of the book, Black People Are My Business, comes from one of her essays where her daughter Karma was saying, Mama, you need to leave people alone, because Toni, she butting in people business, somebody might say. And she said to her daughter, Sugar, Black people are my business. And so I said, that's it. This is the title of the book, Black people are business, in this sort of full realm. So so that's my spiritual wholeness overview of that kind of spiritual wholeness dynamic. And I just kind of play with how she's engaging that, and trying to say, okay, what is the covenant with ourselves, with our community, and what does it mean to be free? And what's that liberation impulse? And for her, if you look at her work, Eugene, it always starts with the self, like the self first. Then, what's our relationship with you? Then what's our relationship with other members of the community? Then what's our relationship with the nation? You can't be talking about liberation and you don't even know who you are. You don't even have a holistic relationship, with the immediate other. So so those are some of the ideas I'm trying to play around with the book. And Bambara, man, she's had an enormous impact. Not just, I know other people, but for me, just in how I've been, living my life, man. Her work is so powerful.
And you do it so well, Thabiti. And you do it so well, and it woven into the book. So from the very opening paragraph to the very end of the book, you state and restate, interpret and reinterpret, analyze and reanalyze, turn over and turn over again this idea of wholeness, of the whole human being. And in many ways, it seems to me that your book is one of the forerunners of the multiple letters in that string of names that has worked its way into the center of the culture. And I speak of the, LB, G, QT, the letters. Well, she was doing that. She was providing, it was the matrix. And she herself was one of the matrices of what now, has actually become an entire field of study and a movement. And she did it without actually saying that per se. But yeah, she was always there, and you capture it. I mean, she clearly was a pace setter and remains a pace setter because the work is still there, and work about her work or work on her work like yours. And some of the people you mentioned, Trailer and Haki, Toni Morrison, who talked about how Toni Cade TCB'd what Toni Morrison, was after. And Toni Morrison felt, and you allude to this, that Toni Cade Bambara TCB'd this act and work of wholeness even better than she did. I mean, Toni says that or implies that in her comments about Toni Cade.
Well, you're right.
Toni, and the whole idea of TCB that I referred to at the beginning, TCB, taking care of business. And that was heard all over the community. somebody would make a misstep, and somebody said, another person, an observer or a participant, would say, well, everybody can use a little OJT. Say it in my family. Somebody went off the hook, went off the road, and another person would criticize them, and somebody would say, well, everybody can stand a little OJT, on the job training, a little T and TCB,
Well,
take care of business.
That's interesting, Eugene. I'm listening to two things
you did. All over. It converged in the 60s and 70s with all those programs and the art that we were making. All those various programs, that had acronyms like OEO and BAM, uptight.
Yeah.
Our word solar, SOULAR, all of those letters and all those acronyms converged. I mean, these war on poverty, I mean, there was a lot of, even the program at Douglas College in New Jersey, at Rutgers, where Toni and Barbara and all these other people taught. That was part of the new approach, the kinds of things that Toni had been doing on her own as a child and as a track star at high school, putting people together. How do you work? How do you organize? What is an organizer? What is the work of an organizer? So Eugene, all of that she was doing was preparing us for where we are now. I mean, I think of her daily often when I look at the work we have to do, and when I talk to mentees and former students, relatives, just young people, high school students, grade school students, TCB.
Hey, Eugene, you mentioned you mentioned a couple of things I'm gonna just pull into. So you're absolutely right about, I mean, I think many people, some people know, but not enough. I'll say, one of her a good friend of hers and editor, Toni Morrison, really, as you pointed out, really, really, loved what she did with her writing. Yes. And, Toni is really unique because she, people, and I write about the fact that, she's a social worker, and she did social work, and then also, is doing this art. And as you say, just kind of putting people together. I know that she, just like her art couldn't limit itself to one thing, she doesn't limit herself to, okay, I'm just in this organization, right? Moving around, dealing with people. And so when I think about, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about the short story from The Seabirds Are Still Alive, The Apprentice. And I'm thinking that Toni is Naomi working with the young apprentice, and what does it mean to be an activist? And so the young apprentice is really smart and committed to, being a social activist, but Naomi is showing her how to be gracious with people who are full of stuff, and that spend time with the elders, and that, we're in the restaurant helping to clean up, so that there's really nothing, people have these ideas of leadership being really, like grand, and it's about, bringing in the boxes, cleaning up in the kitchen. I mean, that kind of, organizational work. And so her work in those stories, like The Apprentice or The Organizer's Wife or The Seabirds Are Still Alive, is always modeling, this is what it means. This is what the work of liberation, this is what it is. This is what it means, right? And then even the stories from Gorilla My Love deal with, I call it kind of slaying gorillas and other, impediments to wholeness.
Sure.
But it begins with finding the self, right? Getting right with the self. And so some people mistake those as, some scholars said, oh, this is children's fiction. I said, no, it's not children's fiction. She's really engaging this idea of, number one, getting whole with self. And also you see this constant negotiating these tensions between, elders and the youth, right? And that each need to be listening to each other, and that, it's a holistic, this struggle of liberation is holistic, and it requires all of these voices and all of this input, So.
Well, I thought I thought her work, wholeness is very apt for her. Complete, finished, but still becoming more finished, still becoming more complete, and going to work, going to do the work, and the word work was and remains a synonym for whatever you do. Do it well. And so her work was very broad and at the same time very deep. You knew it when she showed up. You could see it when she looked at you. She penetrated your soul by looking at you, almost like she could just correct you. She could bring you upright. You might have been standing, but you weren't upright. And that was her manner. I mean, she could, look right through you, find essences, find value, and then hand it back to you. You could tell. I mean, you could really tell that she was it's like surveying you, like Gwen Brooks. Toni Cade said that of Gwen Brooks, that she surveys people. James Baldwin, to whom Toni was close, did the same thing. Kind of rear back and look at you, really look at you like, and if you were saying something that wasn't up to who you should have been, Toni, she would look at you with the eyes like, what? You're better than that. You're bigger than that. You're fuller than that. That was the way Toni responded to humanity, to humans, to people around her. And I told you, she would hang around in a community after she had come to the university. We brought her to a university, and I knew about this happening on several occasions. Toni she'd take off, and you'd think she was gone, but she was still in the community for several days. I witnessed this on several occasions. Most people came to the airport. You picked them up, and whatever, dropped them at the hotel. You took them to do their spiel, to read, to do a panel, to lecture, and then they were gone. But Toni, you thought she was gone, and then you run into somebody and said, "Oh, we had a great time with Toni last night," and you'd ask, "Toni who?" And they say, "Toni Cade." Toni Cade Bambara, or TCB. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, she's been in town for a week. You thought she had taken off. I said, and that was very common. And interestingly enough, it was very common for her to be with the common people, and the people were not intellectuals necessarily, but organizers, great organizers, literate and organizers, but hadn't read all the things, hadn't read Marx, hadn't read the book on the crisis of the Negro intellectual, the Black intellectual, hadn't read Du Bois, but they were rooted, they knew the Amis, they knew all the secret societies, the Elks, and the Daughters of the Eastern Star. And those were people that Toni was very, very interested in, and that she clung to. Amis. She really AME. People who were rooted in the community, and she stayed as close to them as she did fellow intellectuals.
Yeah, and you see that coming through in all of her work, where she is taking the readers on a tour through the community, and saying, here's what the Black culture experience is. Here are the people that comprise it, right? And so, as you were talking, I was thinking about when you were saying she looks right through you. I was thinking about from which collection? The Seabirds Are Still Alive. There's a short story called A Tender Man. And, there's a brother that the young lady is dating who has an interracial child, and he's not doing what he's supposed to do with that child, but he's extremely active, organizing in the community. Mm-hmm. And she is, really, she digs him, but she's very critical in challenging him to, hey, well, what's your relationship and your responsibility as a father? To which it forces him to become reflective and attempt to try and become better. You know what I'm saying? And so and so that's Toni over and over, sort of using her work to teach everybody, right? Even a work like The Lesson is very much steeped in Paulo Freire's The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, because she takes those kids downtown to that FAO Schwartz, to which I'm putting a limit on what we could buy in there, and I'm using it to say, hey, look at how much this costs. I remember having my daughters read The Lesson. Went to New York to go cruise through FAO Schwartz. I really was doing it trying to stop them from wanting to, to badger me about something too expensive. But also, I was like, okay, let's really talk about excess. And but she uses that to show the readers, how do you come to consciousness? Because the kids are, really honest, and they're like, who this woman thinks she is, trying to tell us, is she looking down on us, but she's hanging here with us in this community. And she allows, having conscience is about a process. When there's no dogma, you're going to get false believers, and people really be committed to making an impact as an activist. But it's about process, and you have to come into it in your own way. And so you mentioned earlier this idea of being. And so she really captured this sense of the process of becoming intellectually or a conscious person with the kid. And we're hopeful as I write about in the book, the young protagonist is actually going to take the next step, but we see her in the process of becoming, right? And so Toni doesn't say, "Oh, it happened." We just leave thinking, "Well, we'll see what'll happen to little Sylvia." But what we do understand is that the reader also learns, about, how do I come to this, go through this process, because you gotta be awakened to
how do I come and what do I bring?
Yeah, what do I bring, and what are the discrepancies? Like the kids are like, "Oh my God, we're really poor, and how come we're in this space, this status?" And then, okay, what am I going to do with the extra cab fare? Do I act just like these greedy capitalists and take all the extra money for myself and go buy candy? Or do I give it back to, to the woman who brought us down here, right? And so that everybody gets an equal share, right? So that's the moment. And so for that kid, but it's also for us to think, we're going to have a real democratic and socialist, understanding of how do we share resources, right? So, I mean, so she's really just such a brilliant writer. And, of course, everyone knows her number one thing is the short story. That's because she even said, "I don't have the staying power, for the novel." But, if you really understand literature, short stories like trying to write a poem, man. Every word must matter.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I think about Toni a lot when I think about the work we do and the circumstances under which we do the work and what we were handed, the given, the non-done. What do you come to the table with? And we were cooking. I listened to Toni once, Toni Morrison, at one of Jane Cortez's women spurred movements, one of her conferences, festivals, panels. And she said, we were tough. We were tough. This was after Toni Cade was dead by this time. And it was Toni Morrison speaking in the room. I was there, Quincy Troop was there, Danny Glover was there, and Jane Cortez, of course, and Louise Merriweather, and just so many people.
Hey, Eugene, I don't want to interrupt you. Can I make a comment, because it's right in line with what you just said?
Yeah.
There was a question in the chat that said, Thabiti, there's our compulsion to prove that we are clean is profound. Could you talk about that a little bit? And I'm reading that question because I think it segues to what you just pointed out, and you can echo behind me with this. There's another question after this, but you said we were tough. And I think that is absolutely right. But you all were tough, but you were tough with love, right? I mean, I have a chapter in this book called Irresistible Love and Struggle. And that's the Seabird. That toughness was about love. It was with love, and it was challenging each other to be better, because we were all a gerund,
that's right.
In the process of becoming. And so I think that the question asks this compulsion to be clean, and I'll just say that idea of I'm gonna tie that to toughness of people like, I want to, I don't want to be wrong. And so I'm gonna just say, back to tying in what you said, people were willing to be challenged, to be wrong, because they're trying to move, to grow, to evolve. And I wonder if there's a compulsion even now where people are like, no, I want to be known as good, even if your behavior is racist or you're abiding to or silent about systemic racism or what.
Yes.
So I just want to be, and if I can be tagged as good, as clean, then that's all I want. Instead of, hey, I'm trying to evolve and become and be better. And I think that was the challenge of that generation. And you all were tough. And I'm talking about people didn't have PhDs, but they were circles around people with PhDs and I'm published. And
I know exactly what you
you know what I'm saying, right?
I know, of course.
You guys, you all.
And I
should say y'all.
That's all right. You know what Toni did, what we had to do was invent on top of a moving, on top of a conveyor belt.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to carry us somewhere regardless.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the hundreds of Black Studies programs that we set up and helped to set up the hundreds of women studies programs, Latino, La Raza, Chicano studies, Native studies, Pacific Island studies. So how do you conceptualize staying up all night hammering out a curriculum so that you can get develop a BA in Black studies with an emphasis, for example, on history or literature or sociology. And Toni, and it's important that listeners who don't know this really hear it, because somebody said, well,
Eugene,
come on campus and teach Blackness. And a lot of our mouths just fell open like that, because where was the curriculum? Where was the bibliography? Where do where do you start? How do you start? And Toni was literally developing a curriculum for Black life, Black life studies.
So Eugene,
Black survival studies.
I like that.
Black writing, how to write and incorporate all of what we were seeing and doing into the writing. We had got degrees in white nationalism like everybody else in the United States.
Eugene,
even if you were at an HBCU, your degree was in white nationalism, like Malcolm said. You mastered at Washington U and Southern Illinois University. I was about mastering white nationalism. I mean, that and you knew it well, so you had something to hang some of these thoughts and ideas and techniques on too. But then, how did you then make an original statement out of your Blackness?
So Eugene,
out of your grandmother and your granddaddy and your buddies that you played with, what about the music, Toni? What about the food?
Eugene?
Yes.
Let me they said you can take your earbuds out now. You can pull
Okay.
And I'm gonna just pick up on that because there's a couple of questions. What you just hit.
I can't hear you.
Oh.
You hear me saying I can't hear you?
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you. Right? Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Take the earphone out.
You're in the show.
Pull it out.
So Donnie, do I push the
No, pull it out, Eugene.
You told me to take these out. Oh.
Okay, got it. Okay, so Eugene, you asked the question.
Had to unplug the plug.
Yeah, you made the point about how you all were making things as you were going, and this.
Reading and learning at the same time.
Right.
I mean, we were first out there. So the students came to me, the people in the streets and the students on campus came to them. We want simultaneously, they were talking to the administrations and heads of corporations and all of the entities, all the people who run the white supremacist system.
Yeah. So
We want people who look like us on campus, more students, and we want people, and we want our experiences in the curriculum, and we want people who look like us to teach it.
Yeah. So I like what you're saying there, because that's right on par. One of the questions in the chat room is, how has Bambara scholarship shaped my work? And that spirit of innovating and being fearless to create something new is what really inspired me to think about shaping her work within this context of spiritual wholeness, and thinking about, what does that mean, and thinking about family and faith and feeling and freedom, but also, really challenging the way in which, even outside of my the literary scholarship, how am I thinking about masculinity in our society, and particularly in popular culture. One of the other questions in the chat room asked us to talk a little bit about Bambara's work with film. And so, she did the narrated with the voice in Four Voices, and Move. Many people are aware of.
Worked with Baraka on that project.
She worked with Amiri Baraka on that project, and Move. And then, of course, film. It was many people don't realize, was really her first love. And she actually pulled back from writing fiction because she felt like she couldn't say everything she wanted to say in fiction, and felt like film was a better medium for her in which, to sort of to begin to convey that and engage it. And so, someone asked us, and Eugene, I'll let you take this on, naming some African writers that may resonate with the message of around Bambara's work. And one of those people was Chebe and Usman Simbin. Can you think of any other African writers?
Yes. Shoyinka. And we were reading all the African writers. We're Amos Tutuola. We were reading the African writers. We were reading the Asian writers. We were reading the Latin writers. Everybody was into Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Ngugi wa Thiong'o, right?
Ngugi wa Thiong'o, yeah.
That they can.
And he went back to his name. That was all part of it. Toni took her name, took Bambara from from ancestry.
That's right.
I mean, everybody was doing that. James Ngugi became Ngugi wa Thiong'o and started to write in his native tongue. And that's what Marson was doing. That's what Bambara was doing, writing in the native tongue. What I mean is what we call African English, African diasporan English. So yeah, it's something that we need. We really need to get it over. What Toni did and what you're doing. Extending her work, her ideas, her thoughts, her magic and architecture. It's so important, my brother. Very important. even and of course Sonia Sanchez with her use of some African language, very you know,
Mm-hmm.
Posa, and very yeah. You know, you heard her do Posa uh, with like Mary Makiba and Hugh Masekela and so on. Anyway,
Don't so, someone was Jerry Ward asked about in the chat about Bambara in film and her work with film, and of course with Louis Massai in Philadelphia,
Bill Messiah, yeah.
who
He's he's
very
asked me
to me.
to do some things on Tony. No, he's doing a film. You know that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And he's asked me to give him an interview for that.
Yeah, I was also thinking her film background. You see it in her fiction too. From the short collection, Gorilla My Love, where she is literally, kind of situates
Of course.
a film as at the center, but also, I think about the Salt Eaters and someone whose mind is really functioning like a filmmaker, right? All these cutaways to different voices or what have, and which some people are like, I don't know what the hell she's doing, because she's really trying to play with this sort of authorial control in some unique ways that I think, to Jerry's point, her film background and influence is really impacting the way in which she's thinking as a writer, quite frankly.
Yeah, oh, of course. And she was a contemporary of Henry Dumas, whose work I execute. And his story is very cinematic. And her stories are very cinematic. Almost like sketches for plays, like film scripts. That's what her story is. One of the things that her stories encompass, film scripts, or plays, playlets, So yes, I think that the wonder and the incredible achievement of Toni Cade Bambara is that she grew up on something today is being called, Afrofuturism.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very important area to work in, and so Toni could collapse the future and the past into virtually everything she did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
like,
you're right.
She could put it in there, and that is an African way in the world. In fact, it's key to understanding the African thrust in the world, the Black thrust in the world. Is you carry that ancestral magic. You carry that wand. You carry that with you wherever you go. And the past, as the South African poet said, I walk with my back to the future. I have examined the past. I have examined the future. And I'm going back. And we literally are going to the past when we say we're going to the future. It's cyclical. But this is the complex idea that
that's the Salt Eaters. That's the Salt Eaters.
If you introduce this, then it can befuddle people because it's very complex and it's very simple at the same time. You know that you um, you walk with the ancestors. You
Yeah.
always you always have the ancestors inside you or on your shoulder, or you're always on the shoulders of the ancestors. And that's what Toni Morrison knew it. That's what Toni Cade knew. That's who she was. And that's how she, going out into that community, which a lot of us did, we were brought to a place, by the resources of the powers that be. And we got there. I used to say, you put me in a community for a week, and I'm gonna be at somebody's church. I'm gonna go to somebody's barber shop. I'm gonna be at a soul food place. I might check out a gambling den. In the last chapter of my study black poetry, I personally went to every major site of the Black Arts Movement. And I talked to those people. I recorded those people. I read with them. I had a drink with them. You know, Norman Jordan and that group in Cleveland. Hockey and Obasi in Chicago. The Detroit. You know, with all those people there, Broadside Press. I just went across the country to collect that information. And it's all in the longest chapter in the book, which is the last chapter. And I named it Festivals and Funerals after the title of a book by Jane Cortez. That's our life and that's our plight. Festivals and funerals. Festivals and funerals. So, and Toni knew that.
Yeah.
And she worked with that idea and uh, with that unit very effectively, personally and in her art. And at the same time, developed all those wonderful courses and developed all those wonderful projects. And that's who we are, and that's what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what you did, your gift is the gift of her to us. So
Well, that's very
Toni,
kind. That's
Toni possesses you. I mean, all the things that we talk about, Vodun and all the things, all those kinds of things are with us. And Toni
Eugene,
knew it.
you're right.
And
She does. You're right. She does possess me because just working on this project and
I see it
writing.
in your book. I see it in your book, and I feel it in your book that she's in possession of you, and you're in possession of her.
Well, I feel like she's guiding me as an individual, as a father, as a partner with my wife. Right. Every time if I'm not making sure is equitable and balanced, I feel, not only is my wife looking at me with one eye, so is Toni, right? And so you don't want to be like, you don't want to be right. So it's really a partnership, right? And so this is how we build. And so, but also she working with her work, dealing with her fiction and her life has impacted the way in which I think about studying African American literature in general and culture. And I find myself, working on Toni and my own experiences in my life, what I talked about earlier as a kid and my aunts and uncles, and then working at the is also to many scholars. Look, much of what we don't even have to make up new isms and whatever. It's all right there. Look at Obasi. Look at what look at what was happening in Detroit, in Chicago, in New Orleans. What were they doing in LA?
Look at Black House in Oakland. Look at the Watts Writers Workshop in Los Angeles.
Right.
With Stanley Crouch and Quincy Truth and Eugene Redmond.
What are they doing?
And the younger generation, Michael Datcher.
Yes. Yeah.
And the whole younger generation. And in my area of the country, Black Artist Group.
That's right.
Catherine Dunham, Leon, and you go on and on. Alice Walker calls it collaborating with the ancestors. And that's what you're doing, and that's what I'm doing with Henry Dumont and Toni, who was senior editor at Random House when we began to do the Dumont books. And I'm the literary executive, what I've been for 52 years. She was senior editor at Random House, and so I called her the in-house editor, and I call myself the outhouse editor. She got a kick out of that. And Toni did too, because the whole idea of the outhouse, I mean, that's very substantial. That's heavy stuff. When you say, okay, go out in the outhouse. We used to go out there and read. Everything from Sears and Roebuck catalogs to Ebony magazines to the telephone book. And, the Bible, we were aiming at literacy, aiming to become literate, very literate people. And so when you're working that coal stove, when you get under the house with a torch to thaw out the pipe so you can get water running up to the kitchen, whatever you're doing, however you're applying your skills, picking fruit or plowing, going to movies daily in New York like Toni did as a child, going into the community and just get with the people and say, okay, well, I'll help you sow this, or I'll help you mend this. I'll help you prepare this dinner for all the members of the tribe that are coming over, after a week of work, in the vineyard, trying to bring people into consciousness. As we would say on the corners in the 6th Street, come into consciousness, people. Please, come into consciousness.
Hey, Eugene, you're answering one of the questions that someone asked, what can we do to support the wisdom that we're talking about here? And this complex journey with the ancestors. And you've already hit it as far as this idea of, number one, humbling oneself. Number two, really, part of that humbling is really being open to listening to, to elders, ancestors. And what you also pointed out is this, really doing well what you do. So, if you're gonna be an activist, if you're gonna be a culture worker, doing it really well means also, are you studying? Are you really educating yourself and humbling yourself, even if you're not educating yourself as far as reading, but really listening to a Eugene Redmond? I mean, so you're telling me, hey, Thabiti, this is a nice work, but what people may not get is that this book is a collective project of whether it's me staying with my good friend, John and Maria for a few months while I'm working on this, or going to the desert.
And you say that in
your house, or working at Third World Press, spending time with Joyce, Ellen the trailer, spending time with me, Dana coming to you know what I'm saying? So it is it's a collaborative,
brilliant, yeah.
It's a collaborative effort, and it's being humble. And really doing well what you do. And so we're at a real pivotal moment. And it's important to understand that this is really nothing new that we're encountering. And so if you haven't been really studying, if you aren't studying, then you aren't really understanding, okay, here we go, repeat. Okay, it's just different names, different, if the president doesn't denounce white supremacy, is that something new? Or is that something that's always been, who in office has denounced it? Right? You know what I'm saying? Prior to it,
Woodrow Wilson premiered Birth of a Nation in the White House.
Okay, you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So if you got to put these things in the right context. Who
a century ago. So like you say, what is new?
Yeah.
And our job is to create these new cadres,
So that's back to Bakari.
Inform and help form them.
We have a question from Bakari, which echoes what we're talking about. What is the connection to and lesson for Black Lives Matters moment, right? So we're talking about that. Like, how does this work provide a lesson for Black Lives Matters moment? And Toni Cade, her essence as a cultural worker amongst the people, educating herself, the process of becoming conscious, and what does liberation really mean, right? And change, and how do we get to that?
Yeah. Well, you can see traces of Morris, the Tonys. You can see traces. Well, Morrison. You can see traces of Toni Cade. Okay. Hakeem's magnum opus, one of his magnum opus,
Black Men,
Liberation Narrative.
Oh yeah.
And that word liberation, mostly poetry, and he calls it liberation narratives. It's very interesting because it sounds and it has the beautiful odor of Toni Cade. Liberation narratives. So, what we're on this road where we straddle the continuum. Du Bois gave us the ideas for how to negotiate and put ourselves simultaneously in our ancient selves and in our future selves, and have knowledge of colonialism and slavery, bondage, enslavement at the same time. To be anchored in the ancient and the future, which are the same, and at the same time, as be said about, don't be no fool. Don't fail to recognize the danger of now.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I deal with this in the classroom, it came out of these all evening and sometimes all night thinking sessions with a think tank that's been in existence almost 60 years. And a lot of us are dead, from John Henry Clark to Van Sertima to Maya to Morrison. A lot of us are gone. Toni Cade, but to think tank. And so what I got out of it and interacting with these brilliant warriors over decades is I draw a line. I go into a classroom, I put my music on, and without saying anything, I draw a line that covers all the blackboard space in the room. If it's just one board up front, I slowly draw a line across that board. If there are boards on two sides, I draw one all the way around the space. If there's a board behind and back of the class, I draw a line, say nothing. I just draw that line. When I finish that, I take the piece of chalk and I tap the board with it. Well, that's like invisible to the students, you know. And then I said, the line that I've drawn around this room or across this board represents the amount of time that Black people, African people, have been on this and all the other thousands of Earths. The dot is slavery. It's like, I was much younger when I used to do this. It's like a 70-year-old man saying, I would have been somebody if I hadn't had a 10-minute headache when I was 8 years old. So, as my mentor Clyde Taylor says, Dumas tilted the scales and weights of his perceptions in favor of the older strata of Black culture. And that's the chore for us. Tilt the weights and scales of our understanding of ourselves in favor or toward the older strata of the culture. And then the doctor said, that's slavery. Well, I go back to pre-BC, pre-BC, and then all the way back to it in the continuum into what some people call the future. And that's what Toni knew. Toni knew that she had that gift of collaborating with the ancestors. So she had that way to collaborate with the ancestors, which is what Alice Walker said, collaborating with the ancestors. And she knew that time in African cosmology, ontology, thought, time was cyclical, history, cyclical. So you could run into an ancestor at any point in your life, while you were sleeping, while you were dreaming, while you were bump into an ancestor from 3 million years ago. Now, that's hard on the minds of some people, but you can get to it if you live it long enough. You live it long enough so that it's impossible for you to disentangle yourself from it. And that's what I've been working on all my life. But specifically in the mid-60s, when I decided every day I was going to read something about my culture. I was going to read something out of Blackness, something about Africa, from the early mid-60s to now. And Toni did that. And that's the way I work. That's how I've tried to become whatever I've become. And that's how I've tried to teach people to become who they are, to fulfill the calling of Africa. Sometimes we say, be patient with me. Africa is not through with me yet. So that's what I got from Toni.
No, I like that, Eugene. And I think, you said something once before that I thought was really interesting. And because, some people are like, how do white scholars who are really good meaning come into this? And how do even, any scholars or any people?
Yeah.
You said to me something that I thought was really the way people need to articulate is that let's have these conversations, freedom to freedom, right?
Yeah.
Freedom to freedom, not starting
That's
with
my
enslavement and, but freedom to freedom. Very much like Olada Aquilano, who does that what we call a sort of a narrative kind of trick, where he starts with African culture, the way it functions, how it's outlined, right, and then when they encounter the Europeans. So it changes. His narrative is different because, he's already squashed the whole notion of heathen. He's not trying to show that he's humane or blah, blah. He's just like, this is our culture. This is what we do. We dance. We believe in kind of spirituality, blah, blah. Not saying that it's perfect, but this is what we do. Then I meet people. I'm scared of them and blah. So it shifts that whole dynamic. But the conversation becomes, freedom to freedom. But I think also I like with someone said, well, how does this connect to the Black Lives Matters moment? I think we got to be intersectional. We got to have nonlinear thinking. We have to have a diasporic perspective and a comparative analysis, right? And also, it's all about, we got to come to these understanding oppression and resistance, and solidarity is really important. But also, more than anything, as Toni Cade said, we're at war, and the war is over truth. And I don't think it's more clear. It's always been the case. In this moment, you just happen to have a figure that allows you to laugh and cry, and actually, there's no hiding the fact that truth, or the lack thereof, is at the epicenter of what we're at war about. And so, how do you get at the truth? The truth comes from, number one, you got to know that we don't want to make the mistake of thinking, hey, we just came up with something and this is new, has never been thought of before. Instead of, wait a minute, this is not new. This idea may not be new, but hey, wait a minute, this might have been something that was thought of in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. How we may be interpreting it or engaging it is different. And then how can I sit with a Eugene Redmond, a Nikki Giovanni, a Sonia Sanchez, a Haki, a Eleanor Traylor, and have some dialectics, which is what I think the thing I get from Bambara's work is she's constantly showing you it's a dialectical process, this growth, right? And before you jump out there to think that this is the solution, or I've come up with something, different. And so we understand those things. But I think challenging people to also say, we're gonna let's talk freedom to freedom. so that you can step out of a superior mindset and go, oh, okay. Like my daughter, when she was in high school, she took a world history class, and they started with Africa, and then they jumped to Western civilization. And I said, wait, how you make such a huge leap? That should be like near the end of the class, right? So,
but one of the problems is the lack of education on a broad swath of we call Western leadership. And the British historian Arnold Toynbee said that of the major cultures in the world, Africa was the only one. Not that you can nutshell it by just saying Africa, because there are a lot of entities and streams through Africa. But he said that Africa was the only place, the only people that had not contributed to the development of Western culture. And this is, at one time, the historian of Western civilization. So we know that civilizations were modeled by Africa, and they are our civilizations. And so Another way of saying from freedom to freedom is from civilization to civilization.
Mm-hmm. And Acriano does that
Yeah.
is a perfect model. I know we can't stay all night, but I just
Yeah,
want to.
we've been at it a couple of hours.
Well, at least 90 minutes. But I just want to, if I can,
Actually, it's been 120 minutes.
I think we've run out of, gas here. But I want to kind of end with, with just reminding the readers,
Yeah.
viewers, and the readers, and a message. People say, okay, well, what does Bambar's work say for young
Yeah.
people here and now? What does she say for us in general? And I think about the spiritual wholeness that I talk about throughout the work, and we've both been talking about it. You've talked,
Yeah.
and I say, I just want to the impetus of the spiritual wholeness aesthetic in Bambara's work, and her fiction was, according to Bambara, and this is in Bambara's words, in the caring network that exists between men and women, men and men, women and women, children and elders. And I think that the body of work that Bambara left behind, from her screenplays to her short stories and essays, is really infused with her uncompromising insistence that we tell the truth about ourselves.
Yes.
And that it is a primary practice of liberation in her fiction, that this truth about ourselves is the first step toward spiritual holiness, right? And so I think we all have to take that first step. And so anyway, I just think that that's the best way to sort of end the conversation about Bambara and her legacy as a scholar, as an activist, and for us to remember, this sort of the processes of spiritual wholeness, for becoming, of liberation practices in our society, for all of us.
I think so. And I would encourage people to read your book, or certainly read the book, and to read Toni Cade Bambara's work.
Yes.
And look into her life, and find films that she has worked on. Consider her talk. If you can find a lecture or a talk. I have this image of somebody just sent some photos of Toni and myself to the university I retired from. There's a center there, named after me, a learning center. And the director of the center, and also a librarian there, she said someone had just sent her some pictures, and one was of Toni on it. And I have this vivid image of Toni speaking at the National Black Arts Festival in Atlanta. And she has her glasses like this. And she reads, she's looking at people too. And she has this stare. Not a lot of reading. She was speaking extemporaneously, a talk. And, but it was it's a stunning, and I got the photo of her. It's a black and white photo. And she is really looking into and through people in the audience, and looking down at the desk or the podium at the same time. And it was a very characteristic portraiture of Toni. She, she could look at you, and she was formulating ideas and thoughts and paradigms, recollection. At the same time, she was talking right out of the now. And I've seen that several times, being around her, looking at you questioningly, and at the same time, putting some fat on your head, as one of my uncles used to say. when I
Well,
go,
hey,
boy, I'm gonna put some fat on your head. You know, I'm gonna
that's a
drop some
great
knowledge.
that's a great way to that's a great image to wrap up a conversation about Toni. You know,
Yeah.
thank you, Eugene, so much.
Thank you, Thabiti, and thank you, um,
Malay.
Malay, and to the crew. Um, what a wonderful evening for me. I tell you, at 82, these events just become more. They're like rare jewels. Yeah, this intergenerational. I understand Catherine Dunham, who was my mentor, and to whom I served as a bodyguard, chauffeur, translator, and a recruiter for the performing arts company that she developed out of East St. Louis. Um, the thing she said to me, and I think about it now, approaching, approaching her age. I mean, we
Thank you so much,
memorialized her,
both
and
of you.
and she was 96,
Yeah.
and it was in 2006. So it was very. So I feel it. I feel you, young people. I understand. I know you will go far. I wish you a beautiful, great evening, a great future, a wonderful Black life.
Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you so much.
Matters.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us this evening, for teaching us this evening. I know that I'm going to be watching this recording again just because I need to soak it in.
Yeah.
For anybody who's not familiar with Toni Cade Bambara's work, you can find it pretty much everywhere. Her writings, and actually, the film, of course, and the narration of the film, not as many recordings of her speaking as other writers of her generation that are publicly available, but the Library of Congress actually does have a couple of recordings of her reading. So I recommend people just look, because it is her voice is extraordinary, and that's the first access I've had to it. But I do want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you so much, Thabiti, for writing this book and for sharing it with us.
Yes.
Thank you, Eugene. It's wonderful to have a legend in the house. And I want to thank personally Stephen Fullwood, who is the person who introduced me to a lot of Toni Cade Bambara's work, and who actually let me know that this book is coming out. So thank you, Stephen, wherever you are. I think you're watching. If you are interested in learning more about our programs, please sign up for our newsletter. And stay tuned. We've got a program on Tuesday about suffrage. It actually will include a discussion of about our founders, the League for Political Education. So that event is called Demanding Space, Suffrage, Politics, and Power in the Early 20th Century. We'll be looking at New York and DC. And then next Thursday, 1 week from today, we will go to film for an event we are doing with the Criterion Collection about Town Bloody Hall, which was an event that took place at Town Hall in 1971, where Norman Mailer and 4 feminists, or women from the women's lib movement, went to town. So I just want to thank you all for coming. Please stay tuned. We'll be having more programs and education programs just like this in the future. Have a good evening, everyone.